Hey everybody, welcome to this week's podcast. Thanks very much for respecting our moment of silence last week. And as I said in the Q&As, I think it's probably the best thing to do if I just say nothing at all, which is different for me because I'm wordy, but I feel like that's the most respectful way to go about doing this. So I'm just going to move forward business as usual and jump into the news. Modern Vintage Gamer recently posted a video titled How the Game Boy Advance Knew It Was Running a Game Boy Game. And while the title could encompass a bunch of things, the video focuses on the software side. Now, the hardware side of things is pretty straightforward. There's a lever that gets pushed down when you insert a Game Boy Advance cartridge, and if a regular Game Boy or Game Boy Color cartridge is in, the lever doesn't get pressed, so it just launches in regular Game Boy mode, which is pretty interesting because these cartridges run at different voltages. So there is a pretty interesting danger in there if you would somehow get the lever pushed down but also insert a Game Boy cartridge. But that's not what this video is about. This video is about the software side of things. So even though the Game Boy Advance knows it's a Game Boy Color cart and it sends the correct voltage, how does the game know it's on a Game Boy Advance, and how does it take advantage of any of those extra modes or features or enhancements or anything like that? And that's where MVG goes into detail. And of course, the software side of things is his wheelhouse, so you could expect a pretty awesome video. So that's also, just to go back into the hardware side of things, though, this is also the same reason why you don't see a Game Boy Advance ROM cart that could work in both modes. Because you could do something like have a double-sided ROM cart where you flip it upside down for one mode and back over for the other, or you could have something with a fancy mechanical feature where you snap a lever back and forth. But all of those options, and probably more that I haven't even thought of, would add more cost to it than in most cases just buying one of each ROM cart. Not in every scenario. Shipping, depending where you live, is also a big thing, but just as an overall thing, it's much easier for everybody and probably more cost effective to have both, which is why you don't see it. I know when some of the Game Boy Advance ROM carts came out and only supported Game Boy or Game Boy Color via software emulation, a bunch of people speculated that it was like a trick to get you to buy both, and that wasn't it at all. So I just wanted to clarify that on the hardware side of things, and of course I'll turn it over to MVG to talk about all the software stuff. So a few weeks ago, I posted a review of a SCART cable from the brand Belkin that didn't perform that well, but it wasn't terrible, and it might be a good pairing with the RetroTink 5X, depending on your setup and your cables and how important audio quality is to you. Mostly, I probably wouldn't recommend it, but in the comments of that video, somebody said, "Hey, thanks for reviewing this one, but could you do a review on the flat cable that you showed in the RetroTink 5X video?" And I thought to myself, well, of course I already reviewed that. I would have never put that cable in a video if I didn't. Holy crap, I forgot to post the review. So I didn't actually write out the review as you see here, but I took all the test data and I had known that it performed well. I guess I just got really sucked into testing the RetroTink 5X and totally forgot to write up the cable review. So I ended up redoing all of the tests so that they match what I did on the Belkin cable exactly, so you could have apples to apples comparisons. And also, anytime you test something twice and get the same results, it's really good. It's a good peace of mind to know that you did it right the first time. So I retested everything, and it is a shielded cable. You do not get color interference if you're using composite video as sync, and you get a reasonable amount of hum. You're always going to get some kind of noise when using analog cables for audio, but it's within reason and it should be fine for whoever wants to use it. Unfortunately, though, the YouTube short didn't really come out okay, and I don't know how I feel about those anymore. They're fun to make, but YouTube stopped sending people notifications of them, so they got no views, which means it was mostly a waste of time, and the compression is always awful. So for example, if you go to the post and you check out this picture, you could very obviously see where the Belkin cable has the interference on the color and the other ones don't. You might not be able to see it in this video. That's fine, but you know, that's something that's pretty easy to solve. Just go to the page and look at it. But the audio test was tricky because depending on how you record it, you might need headphones to hear it. You might be able to hear it just using your cell phone speaker, but then there's a lot of background noise too, so it kind of makes the other stuff, the good solutions, sound noisy themselves when they're not. So I tried to do it the best I could. The compression immediately ruined the color test, and then the sound part of it worked fine at first, but in case anybody doesn't know, YouTube compresses your videos twice. Once immediately once you upload it, and then it usually takes about 24 hours to recompress to get down to a higher quality, but less physical size file for them. And after the second compression, you could not hear the difference at all in audio. So I guess I'm going to stop doing YouTube Shorts, because if it's just killing the algorithm and I can't even use it for things like this, which would have been perfect, I couldn't think of a better way to get the word out there for stuff like this and say, hey, also just listen into the audio test or look for the visual comparison. But I think I'm going to have to just stop doing those. Also, some people seem to misunderstand the test criteria of the Belkin cable and why I would do something like that. They didn't think it was a fair comparison, but respectfully, I think you're looking at it from the wrong perspective. If you take a scenario that's fully shielded and in a enclosed test environment, you're going to get results that don't really mimic what you would see in a real life scenario, which is why I like using that really cheap, junky receptacle coupler, because it probably does add a little bit of interference, but not more than you would see if you had cables run along other cables in your full setup, whereas I'm just doing an empty test on my desk here with nothing else around it. And I think the most important part of these tests, regardless of if you want to argue about, comparison, you could very easily see a few cables performing well and a few cables not performing well. So that's the whole point of the test. It's not a whole, how good is my test setup? It's just simply, how do these compare to each other? A known good setup and the new setup. And I think the fact that the Belkin cable performed the way it did and the retro gaming cable, flat SCART cable performed the way it did proves that the test setup is fine. So I always appreciate my fellow nerds and the criticism. All of it makes my testing better, but sometimes you got to just read the post and understand that there's a specific reason I'm doing these things. So hopefully I cleared that up for the people who are confused. But the bottom line is, I could repeat this test and have repeated this test in multiple setups. And the flat SCART cable from Retro Gaming Cables is shielded. The Belkin one is not. So use that, use that knowledge as you will. But I would definitely recommend the flat one over the Belkin one. And I think they're pretty similarly priced too. So check out the links for everything you'd need. The musician Remute has just opened pre-orders on a brand new album that's due to be released this fall, which is going to be released on a Game Boy cartridge. And like Remute's previous releases for the Genesis, Super Nintendo, and PC Engine, these cartridges are going to use the hardware of the console to generate the audio. So it's not like an MP3 that's just played through on a cheap little FPGA. It's designed the same way game music was on these cartridges. So depending on the mods that you've done to your Game Boy or the previous consoles and the condition it's in, it'll sound a little different, exactly like an original game. And I love that. I love the originality of that. And I'm just also a big fan of Remute's music. So if you would like to listen to this, there's a preview on Bandcamp. And if you'd like to purchase it, you get immediate access to at least one or two of the MP3s. And then once it's released, you have the full digital download, which I believe is just a recording taken of the Game Boy cartridge. And you also obviously would get the cartridge itself. So if you're a fan of electronic music and video games, give this one a shot, because the song that I heard is awesome. And if it's like the rest of the Remute albums, it's going to be a fun thing to collect and own. Fans of the old-school Star Wars game TIE Fighter will be very excited about this next one. The TIE Fighter Total Conversion Project has just released version 1.0 of a mod for X-Wing Alliance that allows you to play a remastered version of the original TIE Fighter. And that was a game that I think anybody growing up in that era probably played or at least saw, and it was an awesome game that really opened up some doors for LucasArts Entertainment to make some pretty incredible games. And now anybody could enjoy it if they have X-Wing Alliance and are able to download this patch. The version 1.0 contains the first 8 campaign battles, the first 8 out of 13 from the original, and there's a classic mode as well as a new updated mode that allows you to kind of expand what you could do with it. So I have not had a chance to try this out yet, but it is absolutely something on my list that I would really like to play. You could get X-Wing Alliance on Good Old Games or Steam, and you should also watch Project Lead Angel's tutorial video, as there's a bunch of steps and options that you could install to make sure that it goes in correctly. I highly recommend reading Vanessa's post on this for all of the details. While I'm certainly very excited about it, I'm not as knowledgeable of the project as she is, so definitely take a look at the post, but overall, this seems really awesome and something I would definitely like to give a try. Hotego has just released his CPS2 core for the Mister as what he's calling a public beta. And it's an interesting scenario because the core apparently isn't quite up to the standards that Hotego likes to release things in, but other people have seen live streams of his Patreon supporters stream these games with no bugs whatsoever. I just streamed a bunch of them and had a great time, and there were 0 glitches. So it's kind of in an interesting place where people are really just thirsty to get their hands on this, but Hotego's not quite ready to release it. So he decided to just put it out as a public beta, not a private beta, so anybody who wants to jump through the hoops can try it. And there's 2 ways to get this, and one of the ways, I guess, caused a bit of controversy that I don't really agree with, but I'd like to put the info out there just so people could understand what it is that they're getting. So in order to use this public beta, the first thing that you could do is simply download the files from his GitHub page, load them onto your Mister, load the corresponding MRAs in the correct directory, download the ROMs, and set it up manually yourself. This would be fine if you wanted to do something like, oh, I have 2 of my favorite games are on the CPS2, so let me put all the work in for these games. So, that's probably the easiest scenario and totally fine to do, and it's not that big of a deal. Now, this is a bit more complicated for people that aren't used to the Mister's infrastructure and how to update things and knowing what files correspond with what directories and all of that. So there is another easier way to do it that all of Hotego's Patreon subscribers should probably be doing anyway, because it just makes it all easier. You essentially enable beta cores in the update all script, and it takes care of all of this for you. But here's where the problem lies. That also downloads all of the beta cores, including the ones that non-Patreon subscribers don't really have access to. So if you're not a Patreon subscriber, hold off for a minute and I'll explain that at the end. But if you are, or if you don't mind seeing beta cores that you may or may not be able to use, check this out. Basically, just download the update all script and stick it in the scripts directory of your Mister and reboot. You'll see the script there and run it. And then as soon as it starts to boot, hit the up button if you on whatever keyboard or controller you have mapped, and that'll bring you into a settings menu. Now, if you don't see the options screen, or if you're plugged into a CRT, you're probably going to want to plug it into an HDMI device and check to see if there's any errors on the screen. But if you are using a CRT, you only have to set these settings once. So just plug it into any kind of HDMI monitor, TV, capture card, whatever, set these settings, and then you don't have to worry about it again. But once you get there, you go into the Update All Settings menu, go into the Hotego Updater, and then set Install Beta Cores to True. And that's it. Then just exit and hit Run Update All, and then the next time you run it, it doesn't really matter. You don't need to change any settings. Even if you're hooked up to a CRT and you have that error that says you won't be able to see what the updating is, that's fine. It'll do it in the background. And if you are a Patreon subscriber, you'll then also need to manually put one zip file into a corresponding directory. Instructions are all up on the Patreon and the Discord. And that's pretty much it. So Patreon supporters now only have one file to deal with, and they can update and get all of these beta cores right away. So here's where the bit of controversy came in, is if you're not a supporter of Hotego's Patreon and part of the beta program, and you set this up to download all of the cores, what you'll get is a bunch of cores that are only released as beta that have a splash screen on them that says, please support the Patreon if you want to get access to these beta files. And the problem is that most people would, especially people familiar with the Mister project, would see that and go, oh, that's a beta file. I didn't really want this, but whatever. I'll either pay for the Patreon or wait until it comes out of beta and it's probably more stable. But if you're not part of the Mister project, people interpreted that as DRM or adware or something. So they interpret it as, if you want this game, you have to pay for it. I don't agree with that, but I do at least understand how people could have that perspective. I honestly think that if somebody doesn't take 10 seconds to just read the splash screen and then go to the Patreon page and go, oh, okay, I have a choice of supporting this person, but everything they release is free as soon as it's public, so I don't have to. I thought that was pretty obvious, and I thought that was also obvious even for people who English isn't their first language, because that's something I'm always sensitive to, because I know I talk about it a lot, but I always feel so lucky that I get to talk to people all around the world, and I don't ever want the fact that I don't speak somebody else's language to hinder our communication. And I thought the splash screen did a good job determining that, but I do understand both sides. You know, it could be easy to misunderstand, and some people just don't want to get their hopes up, see an awesome core, click on it, and have a splash screen. I understand both sides of this, but I certainly didn't think it was a big deal, and I certainly didn't think there was any intentional trickery going on. Although I do wish there was some kind of way to get a happy medium. So maybe for the public betas, people have to get the RBF file from the GitHub, but once it's there, the update all script would take care of everything else. So people who aren't part of the Patreon only need to download one file and then, something like that. I don't really know, but I think the more important thing to remember is that the Mr. project is still very new, and we're still all figuring out this stuff together. And whenever you figure stuff out, there's going to be bumps in the road on the way. So I certainly don't have any negativity towards anything at all related to the Mr. project. I still love it. I just think it's something that, we're going to figure out the right thing to do as we go. And what's right today might not be right 6 months from now. So I'm very excited about the CPS2 core. I'm so appreciative of all the work Hotego and all the people that contribute as well put forth to this. I don't want to say I don't want to go as far as to call myself a beta tester, even though I do support the Patreon and I do play the beta cores, because I don't really give too much feedback. And on the opposite side, there are a lot of people that put a lot of hours into this and report all of the bugs they find. I actually never really ran into any bugs anyway, but they put a lot of time and effort into it. So it's just very cool to see the community come together and work on stuff like this that a lot of people would really benefit from. So overall, I just think it's 100% positive in every way, except maybe a misunderstanding on the splash screen side. So I don't know. I'm sure we'll figure all of this out at some point. But if you want the CPS2 public beta right now, you could get it for free. You could sign up for Hotego's Patreon, or you could just wait a few more weeks until it hits main public release and don't bother with anything other than the basic update all script. Totally up to you, but either way, I'm super excited for it, and I can't wait to see what comes next. I just released a video highlighting the LaserBear LCD CRT case, which was an interesting project to work on, an interesting way to edit it, but let's start with the project itself. Basically, this allows you to take a tablet screen, specifically from certain models of the older iPads, which are pretty much useless these days otherwise, as well as just buy a direct LCD screen off of Amazon or AliExpress, and mount them into a front bezel, which then bolts into a case that kind of resembles a small CRT. And there's a few reasons that you would want to do something like this. First of all, it runs at a resolution that Mr. supports directly. So right there, you get a really great one-to-one, very sharp pixel output of it. It's got about a millisecond or two of lag, which is really impressive. It could easily be rotated for both left or right tate modes. And on top of that, it's super lightweight. So it's not a heavy CRT. It weighs a pound. I think I put it on my shipping scale, and it was just under a pound. It was like 15.6 ounces or something. So it's a really interesting device for some people. Obviously, other people might look at it and go, I don't really get it. It's not for me. That's totally fair. It's 100% fair, but I loved it. I thought it was pretty neat. Now, it is very small. It is the 10-inch screen, but it's a size that's kind of between like an 8-inch BVM and a 14-inch BVM. It definitely feels bigger. It feels quite a bit bigger than the 8-inch one, but not as big as a 14-inch. So it's something to think about. Also, there's some odd bugs with the hardware itself that have nothing to do with Greg or his kit. It's really just the driver board itself. But things like the volume is inside the menu. There are no dedicated volume buttons, which that's pretty annoying. And also things like the aspect ratio control don't work. So if you're using something like a Mister that runs in its native resolution, not a problem at all. If you're using DC Digital or PS1 Digital or anything that could run in a 960p mode, that seems to work fine. But if you have a device that only outputs a widescreen 1080p or 720p image, you're going to get black bars on the side unless they have an option to run in full screen mode. So all of those things like the classic consoles, the NES Classic or Genesis Classic, that's where you would want to set them to 16:9 mode, because this is a 4:3 LCD, so it should fill the screen perfectly. And now I have a much renewed appreciation for devices that have 16:9 modes, because you're not stretching it to the wrong aspect ratio. In this case, you're using a 4:3 LCD screen, so it keeps the original aspect ratio. So I hope that maybe some people are able to kind of figure out how to hack that interface, or maybe there's an SDK out there. And if you're able to do things like change the aspect ratio and program volume to the buttons, then it would kind of be an easier thing to use. But I still love it, and I especially love it for being able to rotate it so easily. I was able to play a bunch of games that I don't often get the opportunity to, because I don't have any rotated CRTs here that are already hooked up. I would have to set everything up and then flip it myself. And I don't have any monitors that can just spin. I don't have any like VESA mounts with the spinning rear mount to it. So I definitely used the heck out of this since I got it. I really appreciated it. And the other thing too is the way I went about making this video was I kind of knew I was going to need some help and ask some stupid questions, so why not do that on camera with Greg? And there were a few things that I didn't quite get until he showed me, and we did 2 live streams of it, and I cut those together into one video and then added a fancy opening with, the nice camera shots and all that stuff that I try to normally do. And I kind of liked it. I liked that I was able to just have fun and do a no-pressure live stream and cut that into a video. It actually took a lot longer than if I were to just make an instructional video, but I had a lot of fun doing it. So definitely want to hear all of your feedback. Should I do other stuff like that again, or just stick to the normal format that I have? And also, I always like to hear people's feedback about these. A lot of people who didn't even like it, I mean that respectfully, like they appreciated the project, but they didn't think it was for them, still had some cool things to say about it and things that I hadn't thought of before, like the classic consoles. So definitely interested in hearing your opinions on all of this stuff. But if you were in the market for a dedicated, super low lag, small gaming monitor, it'll work with the Mister, it'll work with the RetroTink 5X, and basically anything that puts out either a 720p, 960p, or 1080p signal that you could fill the screen. I haven't tested 1200p or 1440p, but it's probably something I should get around to doing at some point. But basically it's a pretty neat kit, multiple HDMI inputs, and it's not too expensive overall if you have a tablet that you could utilize the screen from. You could save quite a bit of money there. If not, it's going to be about $200 total, but that's still cheaper than your average 1 millisecond gaming monitor, still cheaper than most CRTs that could take a high quality input. And if you're a Mister user, there is the direct mode for it. So check out the video in the post for details. The post has different details in it. So I would definitely, if you're interested in this, skim the post at least and watch the video, and that way you can get all the info you need before you decide if you want to purchase or not. There's been a new firmware update to both versions of the Fenrir optical drive emulator for the Sega Saturn that add a few pretty cool features. The first is nested folders, so basically subfolders. So if you're like me and you like to keep your games organized, whether it's by region or type of game or just alphabetically, you could now have subfolders on your SD card and just sort your games that way. It looks like you could mix and match as well, so you could have a bunch of games in the root plus some subfolders, pretty much whatever you would like, just like if you're browsing a regular SD card. So that's always a big help. And there's also support for what SED is calling screenshots, which is essentially thumbnails in the menu. So you need to format the screenshot a specific resolution. I believe it's 128 by 96. then put it in a folder named screenshots and label it the exact same name and, with all of the exact same characters as the game folder. And then whenever you select it, it'll pop up. And also, I believe it uses the chips on the Fenrir itself to generate these thumbnails. So it's going to be a lot quicker than other ODEs or ROM carts where sometimes when it uses the console itself, there's quite a bit of delay from when you select a game to when the thumbnail pops up. Not always, but it's just certainly out there. That's something I've run into with ROM carts and ODEs over the years, and it doesn't seem to be an issue on this one. It seems to be as you're scrolling through, it's pretty quick. And if there's no folders or if there's no screenshot for the folder, you just get a view with nothing in it. So either way, great options. And for anybody that's unaware, the Fenrir is now available for purchase in 2 different versions, the 20 and the 21 pin version, which is pretty cool because that means I think every single version of the Sega Saturn could now be used with this. And while it's not a cheap product, it is the least expensive of all of the optical drive emulators for the Saturn. So I tried it myself when it first came out. I was a big fan of it. I thought it worked really well. So anybody that's interested in the cheapest solution, please check it out. The links to everything are here, and if you go to purchase one, just select which version of the Saturn you have from the drop-down menu, and you should be able to get the one you need right there. Krix has just released a new firmware update to the Mega EverDrive Pro that adds support for the upcoming game Demons of Astaborg, which has been described as kind of a Metroidvania for the Genesis that's not out yet, but when it is released, whether you purchase the actual hard game copy of it in a real Genesis cartridge or you buy it on Steam, you're able to legally get the ROM for it as well. So I think that's a pretty big deal. I think over the years, I've certainly bought lots of games like this on Steam, like Tanglewood, for example, that I never once played on Steam. I bought it so I could support the developer, took the ROM, loaded it up on a ROM cart, and was able to enjoy it on original hardware. And I did buy the cartridge of Demons of Astaborg, but I think that's probably how I'm going to treat this one as well. I'll probably leave the cartridge all nice and in the case. I'll open it to see what it's like and everything. I don't normally like to leave things sealed, but I'll be playing off the ROM cart just for convenience. So it's awesome that Krix was able to add support for it for when it is released. I think it should be any time now. The original release was supposed to be in June, but with the hard copy of the carts being manufactured, who knows if that was delayed with all of the part shortages. So I'll just say it's going to be released. It's scheduled to be released soon and looks like a pretty cool game. Another addition to the firmware is more developer-centric. I think I'm getting this right, but I believe it adds the ability to enable the Sega CD core on the MEDPro, even if the game doesn't have a disk image associated with it. So this would be for people who want to add the hardware capabilities of the Sega CD on some Genesis homebrew that they're hacking into. I think I got that right. I could have gotten that wrong, but if you're a developer for the Genesis, you're going to laugh at me either way and do what you do. So I just wanted to put that out there. If anybody was designing any games or homebrew demos for the Genesis, that might be something that you might want to take advantage of just for fun. But either way, as always, if you have a Mega EverDrive Pro, just stick this new firmware update on it and keep it up to date, because generally speaking, Krix puts out some regular firmware updates that sometimes they're not the fanciest updates, they're just bug fixes, but they're always a step up and an improvement. So if they're free and it's a product that continues to get supported, you're definitely going to want to take advantage of it. Before I go, I just want to let everybody know I'm trying out a new link forwarding service, and the links are going to look weird, so I want to make sure people know it's not spam or, it's spyware or anything like that. But this all kind of came about because I very often talk about products that I recommend, and especially things like, perfect example, those cheap digital to analog converters going from HDMI to component video. You might want to use that with a RetroTink 5X or with, a Prism going into a consumer grade TV with component video inputs, whatever it might be. And anytime anybody asks me about that, I got to say something like, okay, go to my Amazon store, I don't remember what the URL is because it's kind of long, so go to one of my videos and click on it there, but then make sure to click on this next and look, and it's confusing and annoying. So now I could just say go to retrorgb.link/cheap DAC. And not only does it get you right there, but it also means that I could change that link if that product is ever discontinued. So I'm going to start testing those out. I love the idea of it. Maybe it's something that in practice people are going to get annoyed or distrustful of because people maybe aren't used to seeing the .link address in something, but it's something I definitely want to test out because it would make my life easier and hopefully make all of your lives easier as well. So definitely let me know some thoughts on that if you have any. But otherwise, everything else should be pretty much the same. It's going to go to the same links that would have been the hyperlink or the full link or whatever else. So it's just going to be shorter and hopefully easier to remember. But anyway, that's it for this week. As always, thanks so much to everybody that watches, listens, plays nicely in the comments, and especially thank you to everybody who supports in any way possible, because your support is what's keeping all of these weekly videos, the podcast, the higher production videos, the behind-the-scenes research, all the craziness is kept alive by you. So thank you all so much for any support at all, and I'll see you next week.